Hey, friends. Hey, it is Ann Eileen Thompson. Welcome back to the Faith Driven Leader podcast, the show where we explore how to lead with faith and grow with purpose and make a lasting impact as faith-led leaders. Today's guest is my friend Jenni Catron. She is a seasoned executive leader. She's a coach. She's a speaker. She's the founder of the Foresight Group, and she has served in both the corporate world and in ministry settings. And Jenni really brings a pretty rare blend of strategic clarity as well as spiritual depth to every leadership conversation. I first met Jenni through some work that she and I have been doing in partnership with the Barna Group. And I'm so impressed with her. And just, when you meet somebody and you can tell there's just a cool connection here. I really enjoy Jenni in every conversation we have. And today we're going to be unpacking the power of organizational culture. What is it? Why does it matter? How do we as faith-led leaders shape culture with purpose? Jenni has just released a book. It's called Culture Matters, and it offers a really kind of an operating manual, I would almost say, for leaders who want more than just kind of the good vibes of a great culture. They really want a culture that drives their mission. It fosters trust. It elevates their teams. That's what Culture Matters has in store for you. I really encourage you to pick up the book. In this episode, though, we're going to talk about how, especially we talk a lot about clarity, how clarity builds trust, how culture either erodes or strengthens every day. It's doing one or the other every single day, and why leading with integrity requires intentional design, not just good intentions. So if you lead people or you aspire to lead people, you are not going to want to miss this episode. Let's dive right in. Well, hey, Jenni, I am so excited to have you on the show today. You and I have been going back and forth for a while trying to get this scheduled, and I'm so excited about our conversation today. Thanks for joining us.
And I was really looking forward to this. I get to do a fair bit of podcasting, but you and I connected in person, I guess, last fall.
Yeah.
And I'm like, when was that? But just instantly, the heart camaraderie of somebody who gets it, who has lived in similar spaces and similar worlds, and our passion for equipping leaders. I was like, anytime I get to hang out with you is a good day. So it's a good day.
I fully agree. And what a blessing it's already been. And I was so excited when your book came out, when Culture Matters came out. I know it's not your first book, but what I loved about it, Jenni, it's so practical and like down to earth and insightful. There's a lot of wisdom, but there's also some practicality, which is so much I think what people are looking for these days. And so I'm really excited to unpack some of the principles from that book and encourage folks to get out and read it.
Well, of course, yes, your feedback means so much, but that was really the heart of it, is that there wasn't a how-to manual for culture. We all know it matters. We all know that it is important. We know what it looks like when it's great. We know what it looks like when it's not so great. But what I keep hearing from readers now that it's been out a little bit is them saying, you finally answered the question of how. There's so many great resources that tell you what it looks like. So the practical piece of it, it was hard for me because I was like, I want to give you like another whole part 2 with even more hows. But it's helpful to hear that, because that was really the spirit of it, is like, how can I equip leaders with the operating manual for building great culture? So
yes, I think
we did that.
I think you did. I think the book is a great resource for that. And we'll dive into a little bit of it. And I hope it's enough of a teaser to incent folks to want to go out and buy it and really kind of dig through it, because there's just so much great content. Most of the time on this show, I start with a question about asking folks to define leadership and what's the connection to faith. But I've never asked this question, and I think you're the right person to ask it of. How do we define culture in an organization, and what's the connection between that and faith?
Love that question so much. I love the leadership one too, but enough people have answered that one. For me, the definition of culture, this is the definition that I use in the book, is clarity of who we are and how we work together to achieve our mission. So there's 3 critical phrases in there. The first is the who we are, like that. Who are we as an organization, whether it's a business, it's a ministry, whatever type of organization it is, who are we?
Yeah.
And then secondly, how do we work together? So what are the values, the beliefs, the behaviors that shape the expectation of how we show up together as a group, as a team? And then critically, the third part is to achieve the mission. Because I
Mm.
think a lot of times when we hear culture, we hear the warm, fuzzy, like meet employee expectations, have Friday pizza lunch and free dry cleaning or whatever the perk,
Yeah.
is of the
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
And so we think it's those things, when in fact culture is about who we are and how we work together to achieve the mission. There's a goal, there's a mission that we're on as an organization. And so the culture has to help us drive toward that mission. We're not just a social club. So I
Yeah.
think that part is really important. To answer your question about how it connects to faith, this is a fun one for me because it's pretty hidden in here. Like if you're not a
Yeah.
person of faith, you wouldn't pick up on it. But one of my favorite scriptures is in Galatians 6, verses 4 and 5. And from the Message translation, it says, make a careful exploration of who you are and the work you've been given, and then
Mm.
sink yourself into that. And so that first phrase of my
Wow.
definition of
Perfect.
culture, make a careful exploration of who you are. Who are we? And how do we work together to achieve our mission? And so, as a leader who's a person of faith, even as you're defining the culture of your organization or of your team, whatever the context of influence you have, that careful exploration of who are we? What is unique? What is distinct about who we are, both collectively and even individually, that
Yeah.
helps inform how we work together to achieve our mission? And so
Yeah.
it's kind of hidden in there for me, but I think as leaders who are people of faith, and I lead my own organization, I suspect a number of your listeners do as well, that even though we might, our mission is to cultivate healthy leaders to lead thriving organizations. Well, hidden in that is my core convictions as a person of faith is defining that who we are.
Yeah.
So that's it for me, is that in scripture we're make that careful exploration of who are you? How are you wired? How are you gifted? How are you equipped to show up to others? And I think that's what we can bring to culture as leaders.
Yeah. I love that answer. And I've not heard that translation of that verse, but what a
I love it
perfect,
so much.
it's
Yeah.
so fitting. It's so fitting. As you were sharing, Jenni, the thing that strikes me is that so often culture happens to us
That's right. Yeah.
versus everything in your definition is about the intentionality behind
That's
it.
right.
And I'm
That's right.
I'm I'm remembering from the days of running organizations and running teams that Bill Hybels used to say vision leaks. And I
Right.
think culture leaks too,
Completely.
right? Like, so we
Completely.
can be super intentional about it, but then over time, it can kind of
Yes. Yeah.
deteriorate, especially as we grow, because there are more people who are impacting it. And
Yeah.
I've heard you say, I actually quoted you once on a social media post I made, but I've heard you say your culture isn't as good as you think it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
That
that
was
what that's about, or is that are there other
it.
facets of
It
that?
is, it is about that. It's the so I love what you highlighted there because the the culture that like culture is constantly building or eroding, right? And so just like you named, we have to be as intentional about culture as we are with the other key initiatives in our organization. And what often happens is we start strong, especially if you're starting a business or
Yeah.
organization, you start with this is how I want to how I want it to feel, how I want it to look. But the that up and to the right growth trajectory begins to overtake our intentionality on some of those other things. So, like vision, like culture, things that started really strong for us as organizational leaders get kind of overwhelmed by the strategy and the growth that we're reacting and responding to. And so it's absolutely like a fight to stay focused on how do I keep building out our culture so that it can sustain the growth. And that's where I
Yeah.
see the pressure points. There's actually a graphic I have in the book where I talk about 3 building blocks of organizational health, that you have to have a clear sense of purpose, that mission, that vision. And again, we always start strong with that. You need to
Hmm.
have a clear understanding of your culture, who we are and how we work together. And then of course, strategy is really critical to helping us ultimately make the mission
Execute.
happen,
Yeah.
execute on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what often happens is that we fixate on strategy
Hmm.
and I'm guilty of this. I'm a certified strategic planner. I love a good plan. I love making things happen. And so part of my passion for culture is probably the byproduct of neglecting it in pursuit of growth. If I'm really honest and I go back, I love the momentum of growth. Like it's just exhilarating as it is for most leaders.
Yes.
But what happens is the weight of that strategy begins to be crushing on the team that's responsible for actually executing it, right? So your team, your culture is really the linchpin between that original mission vision and the strategy to execute it. So it takes as much intentionality to keep investing in defining and building that culture as you spend time in vision and strategy. And I know those are simplifying three areas of the business, but I often see us neglect the culture because in fact, in growth, the culture feels okay because we're all winning.
Everybody's winning.
It masks the fractures that might be occurring in the culture because, well, we're still winning. So it must be okay. And then that's why I tell leaders, hey, it's probably not as good as you think it is. Yeah. Because again, the growth is exhilarating. And even in eras seasons where maybe we're not seeing the hyper growth, but things are steady and stable, we might miss the fact that the culture that the team experiences is still different from what we experience as a senior leader. We've shaped it, we've defined it, at least to our understanding of it. So like whatever we're experiencing, we're comfortable with to some level, to some degree. But what the team is experiencing is often different. And so I just tell leaders, I'm like, hey, just start with the premise that it's not as good as you think. Because then you can get curious enough to go, okay, is that true? And what about that is true? And then you can start with a healthy place of, I need to be honest about where we are so I can help move us to where we want to be. Yeah. And I just find that serves us well because, again, it's so easy for us to have blind spots as leaders. And that's true in just about everything we do inside an organization. But it's particularly true in culture. And part of that is because our team doesn't necessarily want to disappoint us and tell us that it's not as good as we hope it is. Yeah. Or they're telling it as they walk out the door because they may not feel like we want to hear it. So there's a myriad of reasons why we might not be getting that data point, and we've got to seek it out.
Yeah, I think your point about that it feels really good when we're winning or even when we're steady. And I think too often leaders find out if the businesses hit some rocky times, that's when they find out that their culture is struggling too, which sometimes they make the connection that, healthy culture, oftentimes it's almost like a healthy culture won't definitely lead to better business success, but you won't have great business success if you have an unhealthy culture.
That's right.
And it's kind of necessary, but not sufficient, but it is necessary.
That's right. Yeah, that's a great way of describing it.
So as you think about, for a leader who is thinking, well, I think we're okay, but I hear you, Jenni, maybe my culture isn't as good as I think it is. How do we get a pulse? How do we really, really understand what the culture is, especially if we're the leader?
That's exactly right. And I would say it's the perfect time to do this. So one of my missions, Anne, is I would love for people to be as proactive about culture as they are about vision and strategy, so that we don't get to those places where we all of a sudden look up and we have this massive amount of turnover, disgruntled employees. And oftentimes that's when I get called, is when people are like, I'll have boards who say time out because they see a ridiculous amount of turnover in an organization. And they're like, okay, you've got to get some help. Well, by then we're in a really unhealthy, if not toxic place. Yeah. And so to your point of the leader who's going, gosh, it doesn't feel terrible, but maybe there's something I don't see. That's the perfect time to actually begin to dig deeper to get a better understanding of where are we. So what you really want to create is an environment where you begin to you open feedback in lots of channels. So if you're that leader, if you have I first would go to your executive leaders and say, hey, I'd love to I'm a little curious about what's the experience, what's the environment, what's the culture like for our team? Is there anything you're noticing, anything you're seeing, anything you think we should be more aware of? So if you can go with And of course, our self-awareness and being intentional for how we show up to that we're demonstrating we actually do want to hear is really important.
Yeah.
Because so that all already is an indicator of your culture. If everybody's like, "Oh yeah, we're doing great. Everything's great. Everybody's happy." I'd get a
Probably
little
not true. Yeah.
suspicious. Yeah, probably not
Probably not true.
true, right? So
Yeah.
you've got to encourage them that you actually do want to know, where are we? How are we doing? Sometimes that might be bringing in one voice that is somebody you trust, but you also know is willing to be honest with you. Who's that person who's brave enough
Yeah.
to give you feedback? Pull them in and have a conversation and say, hey, this is something that's on my radar. I'm wondering if it's as good as I perceive it to be. Is there something we need to know or be more interested in paying attention to HR, talking to your HR person, and getting insight from exit interviews? Is your HR person seeing any themes or patterns in exit interviews that would tell you maybe it's not a company-wide issue, maybe it's pockets in certain parts of the organization,
Yeah.
but that's a good data point, again, depending on the size of your organization. And then my favorite is you want to move to a place where you have a regular rhythm of feedback. So I'm a big advocate of employee engagement surveys, of like regular and annual is a pretty good rhythm, but a regular rhythm of they know every year there's an opportunity to give feedback. They know that we're going to, and what's key is you're actually going to take action on it. If you do employee surveys and you never do anything with the information, you actually are probably hurting your culture more than helping it. But once you create rhythms like that, so annual surveys, getting your people managers to engage the conversation regularly. So there's training of your people managers to ensure that they know how to keep a pulse on culture as well, so they can raise concerns or issues if they're seeing things. So wherever you can create feedback mechanisms, and you can do that consistently. If you do it episodically, you're not going to get good data.
Right.
But if you start to create, and you've got to start somewhere. So of course, the first time you do it, and we do surveys with our clients, and typically when we start an employee survey, and it's anonymous, we're facilitating all of it, but we will inevitably get, if it's a company that hasn't done a survey in years or ever, employees will go, is this really anonymous? Like they'll email us, is this really anonymous? And all of a sudden it's telling us something.
That's a data point. Yeah.
It's a data point. It's telling us they're not 100% sure that their leaders really want this, or it's safe enough to be really honest. Yeah. And so that's a data point. That's part of what we'll use in our coaching and our follow-up with them. And we're encouraging them. The first time you do a survey, it's probably still going to be measured feedback, but find something, take action on it. They see that you took it seriously, that you're actually like interested and you like this is a priority to you. And then as you keep doing it, you begin to create a culture where employees feel a level of confidence in saying, hey, here's where we are, here's how we're doing. And you start to get really good information that equips you to keep building a healthy culture.
Yeah, it's interesting. I recognize it's easy as a leader to want the quick fix to culture.
Completely.
But culture's a long game.
Yeah.
It's a long game. I was thinking as you were talking about it, several years ago, a book came out. Amy Edmondson wrote a book called The Fearless Organization. It
Yes.
talked a lot about psychological safety and this idea that, you can't create psychological safety you just off the rip. You've got to like cultivate it and nurture it and be
That's right.
consistent. And that's a lot of what I'm hearing you say. I'm wondering if you saw just this week, Gallup put out that they've seen the first drop in 20 years or something like that of employee
Yes.
engagement. Give us your take on that. Like, what do you think is going on? I haven't yet dug into the data. I saw the headline and I was like, "Ooh, I'm going to ask Jenni about this because she's probably got some perspective."
Yes, actually I saw the report come out, and in the same deal, I'm like, okay, I've got to dig into this data.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting. It's really telling. It affirmed what I've been seeing and sensing with the clients that I'm working with. Is there's just an apathy in organizations and in employee engagement. And I don't know all the reasons why yet. I think that we're seeing some of still the residual effects of we're still figuring out our work rhythms
Yeah.
because now are we hybrid?
Hybrid. Yeah.
Are we all in
What's
person?
expected?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? And managers don't necessarily know how to manage in a hybrid environment, and employees so there's still a lot of pressure around that. What I hear is that they want the flexibility, but then they feel this overwhelming pressure of, well, am I meeting expectations? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Like, am I going to miss something? Or so there's still kind of these things in the back of their minds. And what I think that does is back to the psychological safety piece and just the emotional weight of work. I think we haven't figured out how to emotionally manage hybrid work, if I can say it that way. I'm kind of
that's
like
interesting.
workshopping this, right?
Yeah.
Like when we had to go in the office on a very regular rhythm, we knew what was expected of us. And one of my convictions around culture is that clarity is a chief indicator of the health of a culture. That the more clarity we have as employees, the more we know how to show up, what's expected of us. And there's a confidence in that, right? That if if I know what's expected, then I know how to perform. I know how to engage. And I think, and I hear a lot of employers trying to figure out how to provide a measure of flexibility while also having the rhythms that help us do good work together. And so again, we're all over the map on that still.
Yeah.
But I think lacking that clarity, I think puts more emotional weight on employees. And my suspicion is, and I have not dug into the Gallup detail or, study yet, so I could be way off from what they found. We all can do our homework.
We'll both go read the report after this.
Right. But I just think that is creating an emotional weight that is making us less engaged in work. Yeah. Now that may not be the only factor. We also have a lot of volatility just at large, especially in the economy and so forth. And so I think just all the unknowns and all the uncertainty we can't seem to find our footing.
Yeah.
And I think that work just becomes another burden.
Yeah.
Now, this is why I think culture is so important, because I think when employers can create an environment that attracts and retains amazing people, creates environments where they are challenged, they are engaged, they feel a level of safety and contributing. When we can create environments that actually draw the best out of people, then I think we see that engagement obviously go up. So I think there's an opportunity there, but it starts with us providing as much clarity as we possibly can so that they know, okay, here's how I succeed here. And I think that's the thing. None of us know exactly how to win right now. I feel like is true in a lot of environments, that the target keeps moving. And I think that's making us uncertain. And I think therefore we just shut down.
What's interesting is I love the thought of saying, clarity as an indicator, and even as a leader, for me to be recognizing, back to what I said earlier about vision leaks, right?
Yeah.
The reality is, Gallup talks a lot in much of their work for years about the importance of the kind of the middle manager.
For sure. Yep.
And so if we're unclear up at kind of the senior levels, then of course the middle managers are unclear. And then if it's just like exponentially compounding lack of clarity.
That's right.
And that's an easy one for us as leaders to articulate on a regular basis, even on the beginning of a meeting. Hey, let's just remind ourselves, why are we here and who are we and what do we do? How do we work together and what is the mission we're trying to achieve? And also maybe to recognize and be authentic as leaders about the areas where there are uncertainty. I think sometimes being completely clear about the uncertainty is more helpful than ignoring the uncertainty and or pretending that you have clarity when you actually don't.
Right? Yeah, because they know that. They know that you're just
people can smell it.
You're making that up, or you're just trying to avoid it, or whatever the case may be. But you're exactly right, because it's like be incredibly clear about the things you can. And I love how you even noted at the beginning of a meeting, it feels crazy, it feels redundant, but like, hey, here's our mission, here's our why. We have a lot of things that we're trying to figure out how to do what we need to do, but this is why we're doing it. This is what matters to us. That just is steadying. That's clarifying. And then to acknowledge, you know what? I don't know what's going to happen with this component that's impacting our business right now. But what we can do is we can problem solve together. We can sit, we can take action, we can do X, Y, Z while we wait to see how this plays out.
Right.
And again, that level of honesty with an appropriate level of confidence. Like we can't go in there and like, the sky is falling, like I don't know what's happening, but it's like, no, here's what I know. Here's what's uncertain. Here's what we can do right now. Yeah. And that gives team members a sense of like, okay, this is what we need to do. And again, that clarity piece, even clarity in the uncertainty, is really powerful.
Well, I think it lends itself so nicely to trust and respect, which you talk a lot in the book about. Trust and respect as kind of these key tenets that just have to be there. And this whole space of clarity, if you don't have it, it's going to erode trust and respect, right? Like,
well, this was a surprising kind of finding for me as I was building out the framework in the book. Was I kept finding this relationship between clarity and trust. That and what I was hearing was leaders saying, "Oh, we've just lost trust. We're at a trust deficit." And I'd hear it from leaders and I'd hear it from employees. But they couldn't put their finger on why. They couldn't put their finger on what eroded it. They just knew that they had lost it.
Okay.
And so as I began to dig into this, and I use, I have a tool called the culture hierarchy of needs. It's basically a rip on Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, but applying that to the workplace and to culture. And to this recognition that there are needs that employees have that we need to provide in order to build a level of trust organizationally and give them confidence in engaging more purposefully. So at the top of the hierarchy, we have things like personal fulfillment and connection, which of course we want for every employee. We want it for ourselves and we want it for them. So that's the aspiration at the top of the hierarchy. But as I began to dig into it, what I was finding, and this was surfacing itself in a lot of the surveys we were doing with our clients, is that there were just basic needs that weren't met. And, of course, in Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, we know that if people don't have the basic needs of food, shelter, clothing, they can't more positively contribute to society and even to their own human functioning, right? It's like they are reduced to baseline needs. Well, the same thing was happening in organizations and does happen in organizations, that if there's not a clear sense of like, what's our purpose? Like, what do we do? Why are we here? If I don't have just the tools I need to do my job effectively, just this past week, I was working with a client who had a handful of employees whose computers were not functioning well. And it was inhibiting them to the point where some of them were bringing in their own home computers. And the reason it is because they have a policy that they, replace computers on whatever, rotation. And they're so strict about the policy that they've actually created this baseline need that's inhibiting employees from doing more meaningful work. And it was like, okay, time out, guys. Spend the couple $1,000s and get the computers fixed, right? So that seems really simple, but it's amazing how much that shows up. But then the next level in the hierarchy for me is something I call organizational clarity. And it's that clarity of what is the vision and our goals. What is our organizational structure? What's everybody's role and responsibilities? Do we have clear personal goals that are tied to the corporate goals? Like that clarity of this is how I contribute. And what I often find is we might have a couple of those, but there's also some places where we have gaps, and every organization and business has their variation of how clear they are on those things. Yeah. And what often happens is, again, it's clearest at the top. The leaders at the top are setting the structure, and they're like, oh, of course, this person does this and this person does this, and this is how this functions, and this is what this team does and this team does. But if we haven't been exceptionally clear on that and cascaded that effectively, there's a ton of ambiguity. And what happens when we don't have clarity? We shut down, we disengage. So what I was finding is that things that we thought were like bad attitudes, disengagement, apathy, which we thought were just like attitude issues, were really a lack of clarity. Now, we could have some attitude issues in there, occasionally. It could be in there too. But what I was finding is that there was a lack of clarity, and that as leaders provided that clarity, it gave team members more confidence to contribute. So
Yeah.
then they start moving up the hierarchy. Then the level of trust and respect, because it's like, how can I trust you as my leader if you're not even being clear with me of what I need to do and how I can contribute? Like
Yeah.
if it's a guessing game to me of how to show up and how to engage, well, I don't have a lot of trust in you or the organization because
Yeah.
I'm operating with blind spots. And so that was an aha for me, and it has been for our clients, that it's like simple things that, and what I find most of the time is we think they're clear and they're
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
And so building in the rhythms, building in the systems that provide exceptional clarity, give team members the confidence to contribute. And then the trust, the respect, the camaraderie, the connection, all those things that we want to be true have a stable
They
foundation
have a foundation.
to
Yeah.
build on.
Yeah. I wonder if, I don't know, 15 years ago, the word on the street was like, create flat organizations.
Right.
People
Yeah.
want flat organizations, and frankly, been there, tried that. And I wonder if kind of the COVID thing compounded this a little bit, but it
Sure.
feels like we kind of for several years backed off of some clarity, wanting to give people freedom,
Right.
but maybe we backed off too far. And there's a happy medium someplace, but I also think I don't know that it's actually in between where we went and where we used to be. I think it might actually be a little bit further on the side of, no, we actually need more clarity now, especially to your point about how do we work hybrid.
Right. That's
And
right.
without
Yeah.
clarity, that's totally out the window. How do you know?
Yeah.
And how, as a leader, do I hold people accountable if I'm not even clear what I expect them to do because
Yeah.
I'm trying to be so, so flat in the organization and give people so much autonomy. Autonomy is great in some ways, but it's like autonomy within a space that is clear to someone.
That's right.
But
That's
I
right.
think sometimes we err on the side of we want people to have all this freedom, and
But they
freedom
don't,
like that
freedom to do
really is
what? Then they
right.
don't.
And it doesn't create freedom for people. I think it creates a lot of odd constraint because they're trying to figure out,
That's right.
how can I be successful, and how do I get ahead? How do I keep this job? And I see that true across all different types of organizations too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're exactly right. I think in our desire to create more freedom, and frankly, I think it was a reaction to micromanagement, which we're all
Yes.
terrified
Right.
of being that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it was an overcorrection of trying to just create all this latitude. Well, again, the problem is, well, if I don't know what's expected of me, if I don't, and it's about how do I win, right? The more
Yeah.
clarity I have, the more, and one of the things that I noticed especially as we moved to remote work, was that our managers didn't know how to hold people accountable if they weren't in
Yeah.
proximity to them. Because
Yeah.
at least if we were in proximity to one another, conversations would naturally occur in the hallways or in meetings where you just be like, hey, did you happen to get that project done? Or are you going to have that to me by 5 p.m.
Yeah.
today? Or there were more natural places for those quick accountability moments.
Yeah.
And I think as soon as we went to remote and we didn't know how to do that without it feeling authoritative, right?
Right. Right.
And so without some of those measurements of like, this is your role, this is the expectation, this is what you're responsible for, you have more flexibility in where and when and how you do that. But here's where we're going to check in on that. And I
Yeah.
think we had to rebuild, and I think we still are rebuilding muscles for how to. I hate that management is a bad word,
Yeah.
because I actually think it's a really core function of leadership. Now, if it's the only function of leadership, I think it's anemic. I think that
Agree. Yeah.
we need, a healthier view of leadership that just recognizes that managing people is a part of good
It's a part of
leadership.
it. Mhm.
And so I think we lost some of those skills in our desire to give more freedom. We didn't create the expectations or the boundaries or then the mechanisms and training our managers to know, hey, here's how I go back to the old Ken Blanchard situational leadership model. Like I use that with people all the time because we're so fearful of micromanaging that then we don't provide the support or the guidance or the coaching. We just want to be completely autonomous and hands off. And there are places where all of those things are appropriate. And I feel like that model is an oldie but a goodie because it's like it just helps you understand, hey, as a leader, I need to know what the situation requires. There are occasions where I need to be much more hands-on and much more directive because of where the employee is or what they need or the role requires. And then there are places where I can give a lot more autonomy and just support to an individual. But that comes over time with an understanding of they have a lot more clarity on the expectations. And we have, again, clear understanding of, how they're going to be held accountable for those things. So I think we're having to relearn some important, really management skills, which again, I feel like we've shied away from, and I think we've lost some of the important pieces of that.
Yeah. I love that. I always think about, I've got my kids are young adults now, but when they were younger, my oldest is a soccer player. And I remember the first couple years of soccer, age 3, 4, 5, they didn't understand the rules.
Totally. Right.
They kind of understood the goal, kind of, but they weren't really sure which side of the field was the goal.
Right. Yep.
Right. And they didn't, and if you didn't give them that structure, it didn't matter how great they were at handling the ball. If they weren't going in the right direction or
that's right,
playing offense or defense, it didn't matter. And over the years, as he grew and understood the rules, understood the goal, understood the positions, understood the position he was playing relative to the position other kids were playing, then you could really develop his actual skills and do something with them. And you needed to give him more autonomy. Don't tell him exactly what to do. And we're not children in the workplace, but it's a very similar analog, right? Like
that's right.
If we don't give that direction, it's just a mess. You do remember the scene of like the blob of 4-year-olds like all just running together down
totally
the field,
totally,
and the parents on the side screaming, "Wrong way, wrong way!"
It's like maddening to watch. And but you're exactly right. It's like it's understanding where are we, and even in many ways, because of so many shifts and changes over the last few years, a lot of us were reduced to those soccer playing 4-year-olds again because we're like, hey, we got to be in this together, and we're not sure where the target is right now. Yeah, we don't know the new rules. So there's a little bit of, and that's why I'm like the fight for clarity and leaders recognizing, hey, if there's ambiguity anywhere in our organization for whatever reason, like fighting to provide as much clarity as we can is going to help our team have a level of confidence in knowing how to show up. And so again, it might seem silly because you're like, gosh, this is stuff that I feel like we should know or should be obvious, but we've had so many disruptions that it's okay. Just like, and you can make light of it. You can not in a, but in a, hey, maybe this feels clearer than I think, but I just want to clarify XYZ or this is what's important now. Or I know that last year we were really focused here and this year we're really focused here. And again, it might feel obvious to you. Maybe it even is for the team, but if you have a smidge of concern that not everybody understands, where we're focusing or what the goals are or what their responsibility is, taking time to just actually clarify that, you'll get data from it either way of people saying, oh my gosh, that was so helpful. Or, okay, cool. That's what I was thinking. We're aligned, So I don't think you lose in that scenario if you just really seek to be as hyper clear as you can. Again, your emotional intelligence and how you show up with those things, all of that matters. I just think the fight for clarity is a big one right now.
Yeah, I think so good, Jenni. There's so much more to unpack in the book.
You can keep me talking about this all day.
I know. Clearly. I am gonna switch our focus, switch gears for a second, but I do want to just plant for listeners. Go pick up this book. There's so much. We've just barely touched the tip of the iceberg with the content, the wisdom, the practicality, the hierarchy of needs that Jenni, that you already mentioned, the lead culture framework. There's so many tools in
Yeah.
the book that folks will benefit from. So I really want to, we'll have a link in the show notes to the
Thank
book for
you.
sure. But I want to shift for a minute. One of the things we're talking about this season on Faith Driven Leader is the whole space of career transitions. And you
Oh,
and I, when we first connected, this is a lot of what we talked about, like our backgrounds
yeah.
and what got us where we are. I'm curious for you, Jenni, tell us about some part of your story. You pick the part of your
Mm,
story that you want to tell us about. But I think specifically, I'm curious and want to understand and want to learn from you on what role did your faith, what role did God
mhm.
play in one of your career transitions in the past,
Yeah.
I don't know, call it 15 years or so. I know
Yeah.
you've had a couple of them.
Sure.
Pick one
Yeah. Yeah.
and walk us through it a
Gosh.
little bit.
Yeah, I think I'll pick the one where I left my role. I was an executive pastor at a very large church in Northern California. That was an unexpected detour because my first career was in the music business. So I could have talked about that transition, but I'll talk
Yeah.
about the one where I left that role in a ministry capacity and launched my business.
Yeah.
And I, so the backstory and history is I started writing and speaking kind of as a reaction to requests. I was
Okay.
served. I had left the music business rather unexpectedly, and God kind of gave me this vision for, hey, I want to use your gifts here in this space. And I was a little confused by that, so maybe ending up telling you all the story. But I was a little
I
confused
love
by
it.
that because it's all connected.
Yeah.
But it was just very clear that God was very clearly closing the door to a career that I thought was going to be my lifelong career, and gave me a deep passion for a church that my husband and I were a part of, and really just with through prayer and processing with friends and mentors, really showed me that I needed to bring my gifts of equipping leaders and building teams to this church that was rapidly growing, became one of the fastest growing churches in the country. And but in that role, I started getting requests for writing and speaking, which were a little bit unexpected, but were tapping some passions and gifts that I had
Yeah.
kind of like thought, oh, that's not part of my story. So I'm doing this, kind of on the side and just really out of just kind of response and obedience and the opportunity and not thinking too much of it, but it was growing while I was also serving in these ministry capacities. And so I guess it was 2016, uh, I felt it was time to leave the role that I was in. There are a number of reasons for that. Um, but it was time that chapter was closing. And I think one of
Yeah.
the things I notice in those key transitions is one of the things God has always brought me to is that clarification is the season ending where I am. Before I run to
Mm,
what's next, in all of the key transitions that I've had, I needed to process and pray through, was this season ending?
interesting.
And that was important for me because I needed to know, hey, now this is a close. This chapter is closing. And then it was, okay, what's next? Because I didn't want to run from something.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, yep, I've done my work. I've given my best. I've made my contribution here. And now I need to discern what's next. So when I was recognizing that the season was ending in that role that I was in, then the conversation became, okay, what is next? And the safe thing was to go like find another job in a similar organization.
Yeah.
But in the back of my mind, and my husband and I had been talking about this and praying through this a lot, was the speaking and the writing things were growing, just without a lot of intentionality.
Yeah.
And so then it was the praying and processing through, okay, what would that look like if that became a business? And how could I use my gifts and my passion to cultivate leaders and build teams? How could I use that in a new capacity? And so that's ultimately what became the Foresight Group, the company that I now lead. But I think that what I would highlight there is that what I've learned in those key transition seasons was that patience to be clear about the ending of one season
Yeah.
and then looking at the kind of the breadcrumbs in your history to
Yeah.
say what is that forecasting for the next season.
Yeah.
And so that's what
It's
comes to
in,
mind as you ask that question.
yeah. And I love how the Lord if we really step back and consider what are the breadcrumbs,
Hmm.
they're very revealing.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Very revealing. And I don't know if this is true for you. I sense it is, but correct me if I'm wrong. But the more that you follow the breadcrumbs and allow God to kind of wake up within you a dream of something new or different or
Yeah.
beyond what you've been doing, it's I think it's almost I almost sometimes see our hearts like onions, and he's
Hmm.
peeling away the things that we've covered up, that are the
Yes.
longly held desires of our
Yes.
heart.
Yep.
Probably my mom would tell you that as a little girl, I used to say to her, I want to impact a lot of people for good.
I love that.
And I have no memory of saying that to her, but she has memory of me saying it often. And she told me the first time she listened to one of my podcasts, she said, I thought, she's doing it.
She's
She's
doing it.
doing it. And
That's
and I
so
thought,
cool.
for how many years did I tamp down that desire of my heart? And as I look at your
Yeah.
career,
Yeah.
the ability to impact more
Yeah.
leaders and more teams,
Yep.
that God obviously gave you this desire.
Yeah.
It's like we become more and more of who he designed us to be, and the
That's so
desires he
good.
planted in our heart.
One of the surprising ones for me, I love that you shared that and that your mom said that about you, or that that's what you said. But when I had my first book proposal, an opportunity to write, had forgotten this, but back in third grade, I had written this novel and I expected that I was going to be a writer. And I can visualize, I can still
Yeah.
remember I had somebody had given me a hand me down file cabinet that had a little lock on it.
Yeah.
And I kept that manuscript and protected it. It was locked away in that little filing cabinet in my closet. And I had forgotten about that for
Yeah.
years. That
Yeah.
was like one of my dreams as a little girl was to write a book. And so that was one of those breadcrumbs of like, oh my gosh, way back in third grade, here was this thing. And then when I was in the music business, I did sales presentations all the time. I had to
Mhm.
learn to publicly speak and pitch products to our sales team. And so I
Yeah.
was publicly speaking all the time.
Yeah.
Never thought I would be a public speaker. And then now here, that's one of the primary things I do. But it was like
Yeah.
that preparation in the industry that I thought I was going to be in for forever was just some of the training ground that was equipping me to get comfortable being in front of audiences, learning how to
Yeah.
captivate and engage people, especially sales teams that were not very interested in hearing the next
Yeah.
product pitch. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's so fascinating to look back and see how those things weave together and that God's got a whole better plan and picture for it than we do.
Yeah.
Super fascinating.
I love it. And I'm so we're blessed on this podcast today that the result of what the Lord where the Lord has led you, and all those
Mm,
breadcrumbs, and the impact that you're having through this book
thank
and
you.
through your talks and through all the work that you're doing with clients. It's just it's very rewarding to see,
Mm,
especially when we see others in the family of faith who are really deeply impacting the kingdom for good, and you're doing
yeah.
that. So
Thank
thank you
you.
for sharing with
Yeah,
us
for
today.
sure.
How can folks make sure to stay in touch with you? What's the best way for folks to connect with or follow you?
Sure, sure. Well, again, Anne, thank you so much for your investment and me and all the leaders that are listening. Again, your story and your impact is a gift to all of us. So
Thank
super,
you.
super grateful for that. I would love to connect with folks. I'm just at Jenni Catron on all the social medias. It's JenniCatron. So that's the best way to
Gotcha.
find me, DM me, message me, whatever. And then our website is getforesight.com. It's
Okay.
GET, the number four, SIGHT.com. And I have a podcast. We have lots of free resources. We have a culture assessment. There, a free culture assessment on the website just to kind of
Yep.
help you go, hey, how are we doing? If you're curious
Right.
about, is it as good as I think it is? It's a quick little tool to say, hey, let me get a pulse on this. And so that's a great way just to connect and see the different ways we can resource you, especially
Awesome.
in the culture and leadership work.
Excellent. Excellent, Jenni. We'll put all those links in the show notes. So if you didn't get a chance to write those down as Jenni was saying them, go into the show notes and you'll be able to click directly through to take the culture assessment, or follow Jenni or follow Foresight and get more information on that. Jenni, thank you for
Thank
bringing your
you.
wisdom and your insight and your humanity to us
Mhm.
today. Such a
Thank you.
gift. Well, that was such a rich conversation with Jenni Catron. I'm sure that you would agree with me. Jenni brings so much wisdom and humility and deep practicality to this conversation about culture and leadership. I hope that you are already picking up Culture Matters. If not, you're definitely going to want to. I do have a link in the show notes to the book. But here are a couple of my takeaways that I'll just encourage you to sit with this month as takeaways from the conversation. The first one, Jenni and I talked a lot about clarity. Culture is clarity. Culture isn't just perks or personality. It is about who you are, how you work together, and how you pursue your mission. We've got to be clear on those things in order to really create clarity. Clarity, then, second takeaway, clarity is what builds trust. I really thought this conversation that Jenni and I had about the importance of clarity in building trust, because when people know what's expected, they show up with more confidence, with more ownership, with more peace of mind. And this linchpin of clarity is really where that all kind of comes down to. Third takeaway I had was this concept that culture leaks. Even healthy cultures will erode if we're not constantly, consistently reinforcing them. Don't assume that people know what the culture is. We've got to pay daily attention to the culture that we're creating. And then a fourth takeaway is that for us as faith-led leaders, we really have a pretty unique opportunity. When our culture of our corporation, our business, our team reflects biblical values like trust and respect and integrity, it actually is a bit of a witness, right? It's a bit of a testimony, and it creates a competitive advantage. My challenge for you coming out of this conversation is to really reflect on that conversation about clarity and ask yourself as a leader, where is it that I need to provide some more clarity? Where is it that I need to pay attention to a place where maybe my culture or my values are leaking a little bit within the organization? I want to encourage you to find some ways to provide that clarity for your teams. Well, hey, if you want to learn more about Jenni, visit Get Foresight to take Jenni's free culture assessment and to explore the book, Culture Matters. All those links are in the show notes. And I would just ask, if this episode was helpful to you, I'd ask, will you share it with somebody who leads or somebody who wants to lead? And please don't forget, leave us a review, subscribe so you can keep up with future episodes. Well, for now, I'm going to sign off. Hey, keep leading with faith, keep growing with purpose, and I will look forward to seeing you next time.